Imagine two people, same job, same salary, same bank account balance. One of them is building wealth quietly, saving, investing, keeping their lifestyle simple. The other one? Every year they make more money, they feel more broke. Same income, completely different financial lives. Here's the thing that almost nobody talks about. The single biggest variable between those two people isn't their salary, their investment strategy, or even their spending habits. It's their zip code. Because where you live, the neighborhood you're in right now, and every neighborhood you move into as you climb the income ladder, is silently programming your brain to spend, compare, and consume in ways you don't even notice. And by the time most people figure it out, the damage is already done. Today, we're going to talk about something that almost no personal finance video covers. Not budgets, not index funds, not passive income streams. We're going to talk about how your neighborhood, the physical place you wake up in every morning, changes your financial behavior at every level of wealth. And some of what we're going to show you is going to seriously surprise you. Because the story most people tell themselves about moving up in the world, the bigger house, the better neighborhood, the safer streets, a lot of it is built on assumptions that the research completely contradicts. Let's get into it. When most people imagine getting wealthier, there's a very specific mental movie that plays. You get the promotion, the raise comes in, and almost immediately, your mind drifts to the neighborhood, the one with the wide streets and the mature trees, the one where the cars and the driveways are a little newer, where the school ratings are a little higher, where you can walk to your car at night without thinking twice. It's a completely natural thing to want. There's nothing wrong with wanting safety, stability, and a better environment for your family. But here's the question almost nobody asks. What actually happens to your finances after you move there? Not the mortgage payment, not the property tax. Those are obvious. What happens to the invisible costs, the social costs, the psychological costs, the costs that don't show up on any spreadsheet, quietly bleed your wealth for as long as you live there? Because there's a mechanism built into every affluent neighborhood, and you walk right into it the day your moving truck arrives. Here's a study that should be printed on the welcome sign of every upscale subdivision. Researchers at San Francisco State University found something deeply uncomfortable. It didn't matter how much money someone personally had. It didn't matter what their net worth was or how much they earned. The richer their neighborhood was, the more materialistic they became, regardless of their own financial situation. Think about what that means. You could be a millionaire who has always lived modestly. You move into a wealthy neighborhood, and within months, your brain starts recalibrating. You start seeing the cars your neighbors drive, the kitchen renovations, the backyard pools, the private school conversations at the weekend barbecue, and something shifts. The researchers called it relative deprivation. Even if you're objectively doing well, if the people around you appear to be doing better, your brain interprets that as a deficit. And the response? Spending. Specifically, impulsive spending on visible, material things. And here's the part that really stings. Those same researchers found that the items people buy to close that psychological gap, the things they purchase to feel like they belong in the neighborhood, don't actually make them happier. You move to the rich neighborhood to feel successful, and instead, for the first time in your life, you feel like you're falling behind. That's the trap. And it's invisible until you're already inside it. Now multiply that effect by 5 years, 10 years, because here's what the research on wealth and spending patterns shows. The reference point your brain sets in a wealthy neighborhood doesn't reset when you move. The lifestyle you calibrate to becomes the new normal. And normal is nearly impossible to walk back. Once your brain decides that granite countertops, a 3-car garage, and annual family vacations abroad are just standard life, going back to anything less doesn't feel like simplicity. It feels like failure. This is called an expenditure cascade. Spending by those above you in the social hierarchy ratchets up the local standard of what's considered acceptable, normal living. And once that dial gets turned up, it almost never comes back down. Let's talk about something even more practical, because most people who move to wealthier neighborhoods are blindsided by a very specific set of costs they never planned for. The mortgage? They planned for that. The property taxes? They knew about those too. But what about the contractor who charges you extra because of where you live? What about the social expectation that your car is a certain age? That your kids' birthday parties hit a certain budget? That when the neighbors all chip in for a neighborhood event, the number is just higher? And nobody says anything. It's just understood. These aren't made-up scenarios. They're documented patterns. Bigger houses need more cleaning, more maintenance, more landscaping. Wealthier neighborhoods attract higher service prices because contractors and vendors know the market. And the social norms, The unspoken rules about how money is spent and displayed, these are enforced not by anyone explicitly, but by the constant ambient pressure of comparison. And layered on top of all of this is the HOA. Now, most people think of a homeowners association as a mild, bureaucratic annoyance. The people who care too much about your lawn. But the financial implications go much deeper than that. Research pulling nearly 35 years of housing data found that homes in HOA communities sell for an average of 4% more than comparable homes outside HOAs, about $13,500 at the time of the study. And people generally assume they're paying that premium for the amenities, the pool, the fitness center, the gated entrance. But the data tells a different story. That premium is highest in places where local government regulation is strictest, and in places where measurable levels of racial bias are highest on standardized tests. You're not paying for the pool, you're paying for the exclusion. That's what the price is actually purchasing. And the history of HOAs makes this even more pointed. There's significant historical documentation that homeowners associations expanded dramatically in the mid-20th century, specifically as a substitute for racially restrictive covenants, which became illegal. The mechanism changed. The outcome, racially and economically homogeneous neighborhoods, remained largely the same. HOA neighborhoods today are measurably more racially homogeneous than comparable non-HOA neighborhoods nearby. That's not an opinion, it's in the data. So let's say you thought about all of this, and you're saying, okay, but I'm moving to a better neighborhood for safety, for my family, for peace of mind. That's worth something, right? Yes, absolutely. The desire for safety is completely legitimate. But let's look at what the research actually says about gated communities, the gold standard of neighborhood security. A systematic review covering over 2 decades of studies on gated communities found something that will raise your eyebrows. The evidence on actual crime reduction is, at best, mixed. Multiple studies link gated communities not to genuine safety improvements, but to a false sense of security. The gate, it turns out, mostly functions as a psychological barrier, not a physical one. Burglars follow residents' cars in. Service vendors enter through access codes. The wall creates the feeling of security without necessarily delivering the substance of it. And there's something even more counterintuitive hiding in this research. When crimes do happen inside gated communities, certain categories of crime may actually be higher than in comparable open neighborhoods. A false sense of security reduces vigilance. People leave doors unlocked. They don't watch out for each other the way tight-knit open communities do. The gate replaces the social trust that used to provide real protection. Real neighborhood safety, it turns out, comes largely from what sociologists call social cohesion. Neighbors who know each other, watch out for each other, and build informal surveillance through genuine relationships. And wealthy neighborhoods, with their large lots and garage entry homes and car-dependent design, systematically destroy that cohesion. Which brings us to the loneliest paradox in all of personal finance. Sharing the same small local businesses, it quietly disappears. The wealthy neighborhood is beautiful, and it is lonely. And almost nobody warns you about that before you buy. Now let's talk about the thing that motivates the move for most families more than anything else: the kids. The research everyone cites is the Harvard economist Raj Chetty's Moving to Opportunity study. And it is real. Children who grow up in lower poverty, more resource-rich neighborhoods do better. Higher college attendance, higher adult earnings, better long-term outcomes across the board. What almost nobody talks about is the age cutoff buried inside that same research. The benefits apply to kids who move before age 13. For children who move to a better neighborhood after age 13, as teenagers, the research found no significant benefit, and in some measures, slightly negative outcomes. Why? Because the disruption of moving breaks the social networks that teenagers depend on for development. Friends, role models, community belonging, these matter enormously in adolescence. Rip a teenager out of those networks and drop them into a new, wealthier environment where they don't have the same reference points, the same history, the same belonging, and the adjustment doesn't just take time. For some kids, it goes in the wrong direction entirely. And there's a second, darker finding from the research on this. Low-income boys who moved to wealthier neighborhoods showed higher rates of antisocial behavior than boys who remained in concentrated poverty. The theory, supported by follow-up studies, is that ecological relative deprivation is worse when you can see wealth up close but can't access it. Being surrounded by affluence you don't belong to creates a specific kind of frustration that has measurable behavioral consequences. The lesson isn't don't move to a better neighborhood. The lesson is the timing matters enormously. The neighborhood you move to is not a magic solution. It's a variable that interacts with age, timing, and context in ways that most parents have never been told. Here's the flip side of that last point, and this one is genuinely remarkable. Chetty and Hindren took the neighborhood data further and found something extraordinary. Every single year that a child spends in a better neighborhood, not just the total time, but each individual year, produces a measurable, compounding increase in adult earnings. Think about that framing for a moment. Your neighborhood isn't just an address. It's functioning like an investment. Every year your child grows up in a better environment, that year compounds into their future income. The returns are ongoing. They accumulate. They show up decades later when your kid is in their 20s and 30s. That means moving early matters enormously. Not just because of what a good neighborhood provides today, but because of the compounding effect of repeated annual exposure during the years when development is most malleable. A child who moves to a better neighborhood at age 5 gets more compounding returns than a child who moves at age 10. A child who moves at age 10 gets more than a child who moves at age 12. If you're a parent making financial decisions about where to live, this is the number that should matter most to you. Not the school rating on a website, not the crime statistics in a brochure. The compounding annual return on your child's development, expressed in years of exposure to a better environment. It's possibly the most important investment you can make, if you understand the conditions under which the return is actually delivered. Now let's zoom out and look at something even bigger, because the neighborhood wealth gap isn't static, it's accelerating. As of the last few years, a record $7 trillion has been sitting in money market funds, parked there by investors who were earning good yields during the high interest rate period. As rates come down, analysts predict hundreds of billions of that money will flow back into financial assets, stocks, real estate, investment properties. Who owns most of those assets? The wealthiest households. Research consistently shows that the top households own the vast majority of equities. When asset prices rise from that kind of capital flow, the wealth gap doesn't close, it expands. And where does that wealth concentrate? In neighborhoods that were already wealthy, in property values that were already high, in communities where the people who were already asset rich get asset richer. The wealthy neighborhood doesn't just stay wealthy, it accelerates away from everything below it. And the gap between what you can afford today and what that neighborhood costs tomorrow gets bigger, not smaller, over time. Which is why the choice of when to move, and specifically where in the wealth ladder you make that move, matters far more than most people understand. Let's return to the most psychologically important point in this whole conversation, because it's the one that affects you most directly. Once you live in a wealthy neighborhood, your brain establishes a new baseline. Not in a subtle way, in a measurable, documented behavioral way. The research on expenditure cascades shows that the spending standards of those above us in our immediate social environment become our new internal reference for what's normal. And once that reference point shifts, you don't get to just decide to shift it back. Moving back to a more modest neighborhood doesn't feel like a reasonable financial decision. It feels like losing. It feels like falling. Your brain processes it as downward social mobility, even if your actual financial situation hasn't changed at all. This is why so many people who earn good incomes continue to feel financially stressed. They move to the neighborhood that matches their income, and now the neighborhood is spending their income for them. The social environment is making the financial decisions. And the trap closes from both sides. You can't easily afford to stay, and psychologically, you can't easily afford to leave. So we've looked at 10 layers of how neighborhoods reshape you, financially, psychologically, and socially as you move up the income ladder. What's the actual practical takeaway? First, understand that the neighborhood upgrade is not a reward. It's a financial variable with its own return profile and its own risks. Treat it like any other major financial decision. Model out the full costs. Not just the mortgage, but the social spending pressure, the service price inflation, the HOA, the lifestyle recalibration. Second, If you have children, the research is unambiguous that environment matters enormously, and that timing matters just as much as location. Every year in a better environment during childhood compounds into adult earnings. Moving early, when kids are young, is where the return is highest. Moving during adolescence, especially for boys, can actually go in the wrong direction. Third, recognize the relative deprivation trap before you walk into it. The day you move into a wealthier neighborhood, your reference group changes. Your brain's definition of normal spending will begin to recalibrate within months. The only protection against that is knowing it's happening in advance, naming it when you see it, and making the deliberate choice not to compete. Fourth, re-examine what you're actually paying the HOA premium for. If it's genuine amenities you'll use, great. But if it's the exclusion, if it's the homogeneity, if it's the psychological comfort of walls and gates that don't actually deliver the safety they promise, that's an expensive illusion. And fifth, understand that the macro forces are accelerating the gap between wealthy neighborhoods and everything below them. The window to move into certain communities at certain price points is not static. The wealth that flows into asset markets flows directly into property values in the neighborhoods where wealthy people already live. Waiting to be financially ready may mean waiting too long. Here's the thought I want to leave you with. Your neighborhood is not just where you sleep. It's where your brain calibrates what normal looks like. It's where your children absorb what adult life is supposed to feel like. It's where your social identity gets formed, your spending gets pressured, and your sense of success gets benchmarked every single day against the people on your street. Most people treat the neighborhood decision as a reward, something you earn after you've done everything else right. Research suggests it's actually one of the most consequential financial decisions you'll ever make, and the consequences run in directions that almost nobody warns you about before you sign. The bigger house, the quieter street, the gate at the entrance. Those things are real. But so is the invisible price tag. So is the spending recalibration. So is the loneliness. So is the teenage boy who needed his old friends more than he needed a better zip code. The neighborhood changes you. In some ways for better, in some ways for worse. And the ones who come out ahead are the ones who understand exactly how the change works before they move. If this video made you think differently about the neighborhood conversation, drop a comment below and tell me where you are in your own journey. Are you saving to move up? Already in the neighborhood? Or deliberately choosing to stay put? And if this kind of content is useful to you, real research explained simply about how money and human behavior actually work, make sure you're subscribed. Because this is exactly what we do here. See you in the next one.